Hello and welcome to HealthTech Hour. My name is Steve Roost, and each week we bring you the best news, views and interviews with the CEOs, founders and leaders who are driving the health tech revolution in the UK and beyond. I'm a CEO and founder of a health tech company myself, and I'm passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. Before I introduce today's guest, as always, I'd like to ask everyone listening to follow us on the socials. It's at HealthTech Hour, and also follow the station, which is at UK Health Radio, to stay on top of all of the great content that's coming up. It was a great show last week with Dan Bunston from Push Doctor. Check it out on ukhealthradio.com for the listen on demand, and or on YouTube on the Health Tech Hour YouTube channel for the video. Today's show, we're talking about a completely new area of health tech for the show. It's not something we've covered before. It's called bioelectronics and electroceuticals. And we've got Rick Rowan, the CEO and founder of Nurokor, that's Nurokor, who are a pioneer in this unbelievably exciting field. Now, regular listeners know that one of the reasons that we do this show is to learn ourselves about exciting health tech and new areas and new developments. We like to showcase it to you to help educate you about everything else that's going on, and bring you in touch with the leaders who are really changing the face of healthcare. This is definitely the case with Rick and this area of bioelectronics and electroceuticals. This was not an area that I was familiar with prior to our production planning session with Rick, but is one that as of learning about this, I can't stop reading about it. So just to provide some context as to what on earth we're talking about before we introduce Rick, 20% of the world's population suffers from chronic pain. The number one reason for workplace absenteeism is musculoskeletal pain, and the number one type of musculoskeletal pain is back pain. Beyond chronic pain, McKinsey, who are a huge, extremely prestigious, quite expensive consulting firm, have published significant amount of research that indicates that bioelectronics and electroceuticals could potentially revolutionize treatment for a whole range of conditions, from paralysis right the way through to Crohn's disease. This area spans implantable devices to non-invasive products, and this area is really blowing up, and Rick and his team at Nurokor are really driving innovation with their products that are already in the market in the UK. Rick is a mission-driven founder, and it's a pleasure to get him on the show to educate us about this area. So Rick, welcome to the show. How are you?
Well, Steve, thanks for the impressive introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Good. So I ask everyone, it's been a pretty rough 13, 14 months in many ways. What's the mood in the camp been like at Nurokor, and how are things now?
It's been an interesting time, obviously not just for us, but for, globally. We were decentralized, being a startup. We, didn't have a central office at that time. So from an operational perspective, we literally didn't miss a beat, but it's been quite a positive journey for us from a commercial perspective, for probably not positive reasons, but the issue with musculoskeletal health has actually been exacerbated by working from home or working remotely.
Right.
So even perhaps when people were in the office or working at office, they were traveling to and from, they were getting up for lunch breaks, etc. But what's been happening a lot is people have been even more stationary than what they were previously at their work positions, and it's created more issues for lower back pain, neck strain, all of these things, and that has seen an uptick for us from a commercial perspective, for solutions, including running pain clinics through pharmacies, which is something we can probably expand on a little bit later.
Yeah, please.
We've got a growing number of pharmacies that are growing weekly that are running pain clinics within the pharmacy practice. There's during lockdown, etc., and even still, it's not been easy to see physical therapists, particularly through the NHS.
Yeah.
So people have needed sort of at-home solutions or solutions remote. That a physical therapist is by its name, physical therapy, and so remote consultation, although of course through exercise, stretches, guidance can give benefit. The physical stimulation of the soft tissue and or joints is not possible, and it's not that easy to do it yourself, particularly on your back.
Yeah.
But electrical stimulation, or with the correct parameters, it is possible to have physical benefit from that stimulation.
I think that's really interesting. And again, that's not something that I'd ever thought about, which is that, working from home, or an increase in working from home, has lots of benefits in many ways. But one of the downsides is that, there's been a lot of money invested in creating healthy work environments at work, workspaces, screens, monitors, ergonomic chairs, and all of that doesn't really exist at home, which actually I think is what you're highlighting, which is that's a sort of an unintended consequence, which is an uptick in musculoskeletal pain, which I think is really, I hadn't really considered that would happen.
No, and similarly, then not only the increase in that, but the decrease in therapy availability.
Right, of course.
Whether that's even a GP visit, even GP visits at the moment are still somewhat problematic, and so there's been an uptick in people looking for solutions, and through our pharmacy network and our clinician network, having the product provided through them has been one thing, but also to just the sheer amount of online searches for solutions.
Right.
Just before.
Has it really, you've seen the traffic and the search volume increase?
Yeah, I mean, for us in the October quarter, as an example, during that lockdown period, we saw 156% increase on the previous year.
Wow.
With big. No change in ad spend.
Right.
And then, of course, commercially across the board, we've seen a great uptick, but that online presence, I think, was a good indicator.
Cool. That makes sense. We'll come back to the pharmacy piece, because actually it's interesting that you bring that up. So on one of the previous shows, we had Adam Hunter, who is one of the senior team at Flow Digital Pharmacy on, and we got quite into an interesting discussion, which ties into what you were just saying around the role of community pharmacies in a world where prescriptions can be digitized and sent to your door. What role does community pharmacy play? And I think that pain clinics, so there are services which by definition have to involve touching the patient. Therefore, and I think that what you've hit on there with pain clinics is one of those. So we can definitely follow back on that one. As regular listeners know to the show, we do the show in 3 parts. So the first part is an origins part. So how you came to be on your journey to be changing the world. And the middle part is all of the great stuff that you and Nurokor are doing to change the world. And then the final bit, if we get to it, is more around what the future is and whether or not there's some issues of the day that we can kick around. So just to get started, how did you begin your journey into health tech? Because you weren't always in health tech.
No, I was in property primarily. Prior to that, retail. I mean, at the end of the day, regardless of the industry, I mean, there's areas within the industry, and property. Yes, it is around physical property, but ultimately it's around people. It's about lifestyle. It's about things. So not just quality of life, but experience of life. The home plays a big part. And with regards to the science, I always had an inquisitive scientific mind, going back to early school days, but I'd also been a lifelong back pain sufferer. I had other physical issues, including knee, which I did have an operation on. But my lower back, I recall, as young as around the age of 10 or 11, having an issue that I had to go to the GP about, and things only got worse from there. To the point where in my teens they were considering surgery, exploratory surgery, which I did have, I would say, moderately unsuccessfully on my knee. So thankfully we avoided surgery of the back. Which is a big deal. And that when you say exploratory, does that mean they didn't exactly know what it was, so they were going to do surgery to try and figure out what it was? Is that what that means? Correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. Wow, that's a big deal.
Yes, and that solution was offered many times, and I think if you speak to even to any good spinal surgeon, that they'll tell you realistically it should be a last resort, with regards to a solution. But nonetheless, through my 20s and 30s, it was always there. And towards my later 30s, it became quite problematic, as in it was affecting my quality of life. I mean, it always had, but it was affecting it more, to the point where I was starting to sort of relook and seek out new solutions, because with something as simple as doing up my shoelace, or washing the car, or just bending the wrong way would trigger it, and it could put me on my back, excuse the pun, for days, sometimes even longer.
Okay.
And it was really debilitating, and it was the point where it was causing me mental stress at times.
I mean, it must have been a huge, I think this is one of the things where chronic pain like that can be extremely debilitating without being life-threatening.
Yeah, it's isolating. It is debilitating, and sometimes when it was really, really bad, you sort of do things to extremes that you probably shouldn't. So you take a concoction of painkillers, just trying to get some relief. Right. The solutions were always similar. We can give you, we can give you injections. We can give you localized injections. We can increase the painkillers. Try this anti-inflammatory. Ultimately, all quite band-aid solutions for what was an intrinsic issue.
So interestingly, so when you were going through that, it sounds like you met multiple clinicians across the span of 15 years? I mean, quite a relatively long period of time. Did anyone try and address what might be a cause of it, or was it very much symptom treatment oriented?
So, I mean, I got plenty of recommendations to physios, and physical treatment was helpful. I'm not taking anything away from clinicians or from physios, but the problem is the physio couldn't be there when I needed it, or and it just wasn't practical to be continuously going for what ended up being a short-term relief. And the clinicians probably less so. It was always about primarily, even so some of the solutions they were expecting to be slightly longer term lasting or longer lasting, they were still primarily band-aid solutions for the issue, and not something that I could live with ongoing, as in couldn't do long term. I remember talking to one. It was sort of a real light bulb moment when I suggested that I take 3,000 milligrams of paracetamol, which is about 6 average tabs a day. I got a prescription for about a month's worth, and I asked the question, how long am I expected that this will last? And not in the exact words, but what was the answer that was given is literally, that there is no end, as long as you need them. And adding to that was also the anti-inflammatory side, because the soft tissue inflammation is often a trigger, or inflammation is often a trigger for the pain. And so would need to take both, because one without the other didn't have much effect. And many times actually the combination of two, even overtaking them. Like I was naive, I was a consumer, I didn't know what the risks were. I just wanted relief, and I would take too many. But they just, at some points, sometimes they would do nothing. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, I was introduced to the humble TENS machine. Purely by accident. I was actually looking for a business opportunity. And distribution of these came up, and I tried it, and it actually gave me relief. I mean, I'd had TENS or stimulation therapy at the physio, but again, it was temporary, short term, and it probably worked while I was there, but it needed an operator for one, and two, by its sheer nature was temporary. So this TENS machine gave me relief like I had never had previously. And, I asked the question, why was I never offered something, like this as a potential solution?
What was the answer to that?
Well, that's how things. That's how things eventuated. But the caveat to that is that it didn't always work. sometimes it would not work at all. It would literally do nothing, which caused me to start to research, around electrical stimulation, nerve stimulation, neuromuscular, starting to understand the parameter differences and looking at studies. So I started to learn how to read, meta-analysis and clinical studies, and what the real data was. And what I was seeing was that the results were definitely parameter specific. So, you couldn't just plug yourself into the wall and go for 50 hertz. That might work short term, but you become very stiff after. And yes. But sometimes you would see different parameters for same therapeutic applications that would sometimes have similar outcomes, or sometimes have completely different, success. And, as I got into it, starting to understand and study the various parameters in those therapeutic or accepted therapeutic applications, I started to think about, well, some physios are very well trained in electrical stimulation therapy, as an example, and they get great results, others not so much. And it was around the therapy application. So, the parameters themselves were very important to the outcome or the applicant. And also, too, what I needed or what worked for me one day didn't work the next. And so pain is not static; it's quite dynamic. The body's changing all the time, and so are its needs.
And is that dynamic nature of chronic pain? Is that consistent across generally all sufferers of it? Is that a consistent issue that it doesn't stay static?
They probably in some regards, but again, everybody's different. Some of our patients will use the same modality or the same formula repeatedly and continuously get the same outcome. Others continue, like myself as an example, particularly in the early days, would need to continuously change which parameter I was using to get a result. And I also had multiple different triggers, and I think really there's so many variables to it. And this is the point, really, is that there isn't one solution. And so to build a better product or a better solution, required new thinking. And so I did co-found a business in Australia that was, sort of based around that type of product. And the more I investigated, the more I learned, the more I understood that electrical stimulation as a direct mechanical function within the body, because the body is, we are all electric. If you haven't got electricity flowing through you, you're no longer with us in the.
You've got bigger problems than chronic pain.
Yes, I mean, if any type of health occurrence occurs, any type of emergency, the first thing that's measured is the vitals.
Yep.
And that includes your electrical vitals.
Right.
And so I grew that company, and I really, really felt, that electrical stimulation or the various modalities of electrical stimulation were so underserved and underdeveloped, and there was so much opportunity here. And the more I looked into it, and particularly things like microcurrent and soft tissue and these that I became obsessed, if you like.
Okay.
And that was how Nurokor was born. But in credit to bioelectronics or electroceuticals themselves, we've also attracted some eminent expertise within that area who also are of the same belief and vision around its potential. And Nurokor sort of taken on a life of its own with regards to its growing not just repertoire, but areas of expertise and where electroceuticals can have a direct therapeutic benefit. Everything from pain, so pain is obviously a big one and a primary for us, but then you've got things like wound healing, tissue regeneration. When you're talking about inflammation, this covers such a broad area, as does pain.
Yeah. So let's jump. We're going to jump around a little bit, because I feel like at this point it will be really helpful if you could just explain a little bit behind the terms bioelectronics and electroceuticals, and to the things that you were just talking about around parameters and modalities, and if you could give us a little bit of background on the actual science, because I know that there's a huge body of clinical work around the efficacy of these things, but I think a bit of background might be helpful.
Sure. So bioelectronics is, as the name implies, it's biological, bioelectrical parameters. Now, bioelectronics, they're all around us. We just don't realize it. Everything from a defibrillator to a heart rate monitor,
right,
to a pulse oximeter are bioelectronics.
okay,
Cochlear implants and pacemakers are bioelectronics. Electroceuticals are the therapeutic applications of electrical stimulation for, a lot of people could say that they're for areas that are potentially could replace pharmaceuticals. So that's
okay,
one objective. I mean, we term electroceuticals as literally any form of electrical parameter that can be applied as a therapeutic, regardless of whether or not it's a replacement for a pharmaceutical. So it's more than that, because physical stimulation, as in physical therapy, which bioelectricals can have an impact on, is not necessarily also a pharmaceutical intervention. So in my opinion, my biased opinion,
sure,
electroceuticals actually exceed the scope of pharmaceuticals, because they also can be applied in the physical realm.
okay. So let's take that one step further, and and then we'll come back a little bit. There's a couple more points I want to pick up on again, but I think let's continue on this, which is that how has Nurokor interpreted everything that you've just said into the products that it now has and is on the market with?
Sure. So we launched just over 2 years ago now with an MVP. So in startup language, that's an acronym for minimum viable product. So essentially a product that you take to market to prove the viability of your concept or application. We have 2 products that have been in the market now that have ended up both in professional sport use and clinical use, neither of which they were developed for, so punching well above their weight. We distribute those US or North America, Norway, Australia, New Zealand, UK, and at the moment also in Ireland, and we've got some Asian markets opening up. So that MVP product was an over-the-counter broad spectrum use product. So our broad use parameters, if you think about things, you call it Calpol here, right?
Yeah, we call it Calpol. Yeah, it's like the savior of every parent with small children. I can say that as a parent with small children. So
these were, I suppose, the Calpols of bioelectronics, electroceuticals, in that they had a broad range of uses, everything from being able to help with management of pain, to reducing inflammation through stimulation of the soft tissue, through to also, we were talking about physical parameters there before. Again, with specific parameters, you can improve things like muscle strength, reduce sarcopenia or muscle atrophy in their aging, which has a huge health benefit.
Yeah.
And these particular products, although sort of, I describe them as entry level, obviously that's underselling them, but they've been hugely successful, and both the clinical and consumer reviews have been amazing. And as I said, they've ended up in areas they were never designed to go. But that was just a stepping stone for the real parameter developments, and that is the not just specialized applications of the parameters, which I'll come back to you for in just a second, but the personalization of those parameters for the individual, which we sort of were talking about earlier. So with regards to the parameters, nerve stimulation is the application through the peripheral nerve system. So there's a whole range of things that can be affected there, from obviously the pain pathways to various physiological changes, benefit or therapeutic outcomes. So if you've got let's use lower back pain, the most common one.
Yep.
Using nerve stimulation, you can help the patient to manage the pain, or improve or reduce pain.
And is your product that's available now? Is it like electrodes you stick onto the area, or like how does it actually work from a customer's perspective?
We focus currently. I say currently because it could change, but we primarily we're a non-invasive.
Okay.
So electrical nerve stimulation takes many forms. We focus on the non-invasive, so through the skin, soft gel pads or conductive material through the skin.
Okay.
There is also direct to the nerve roots. So Abbott recently released a root ganglion stimulator, so directly to the nerve. Then you've also got spinal cord stimulation, which has been around for quite some time. That is, electrodes applied to the spinal cord itself. You've also got subcutaneous electrodes that can be inserted into the skin. But we focus on the non-invasive. So,
so directly applied to the area where you have an issue.
Yeah, I mean that's probably a whole nother.
Okay, well I tell you what, we've got to go to a commercial break because all this fantastic content on the station, thankfully, is available due to our wonderful commercial partners. So we're going to go to a commercial break now, and then after that, we'll come right back and pick up with that.
Sounds good.
Sorry, so we're just going to jump back in now and carry that on. We've got some issues with the commercials. So picking back up on that issue, Rick, when I've been on the website, is it nurokor.com? Is that what it is?
Yes, that's the company site, correct.
So it looks like you've got a product with a sort of 2 bits that stick onto the person. Mm-hmm. And there's a smartphone app or a reader app, a reader associated with that. So maybe if we could take lower back pain with your product, could you just walk us through step by step what someone does and could expect from the product? Sure.
So applying the pads or the applicators as you alluded to in the area, let's call it for the time being. So lower back pain, you'd place the 2 pads either side of the spine, around the area, and again, pain is not always direct; it's often referred. So where you think it's going to work, so it does, it can take a little bit of experimentation with regards to pad placement, but it's not a big issue. I mean, they're reusable. It's not like you stick them and then
you got to throw them away.
Yeah. So you would select a mode, whether it's the smaller device or the bigger device, you'd select, for instance, if it's back pain, you'd select pain or pain plus as a mode. Okay. Pain being specifically directed at nerve stimulation. The second part, pain plus, brings in frequencies that are specifically, or parameters that are useful for micro pulsation of the tissue.
Okay.
So it's a little bit like massaging the area, if you like, to help improve circulation, which again is something that a physical therapist would do, potentially, or a therapist, but the pharmaceutical can only potentially handle the pain side of it. So, electroceuticals or the device is able to do both of these things.
Right. So now I understand what you mean when you said at the head of the show that electroceuticals may, obviously in your somewhat biased opinion, take over from pharmaceuticals for certain things, because pharmaceutical is a drug, is a systemic, device by definition. And obviously it can't manipulate physically tissues in the same way that something stimulating a physical stimulus, which your device and can deliver as well as via the electrical stimulation route.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. That's a good descriptor. Adding to that, often that pain triggers a spasm, which is another symptom, a painful symptom of back pain or many other types of pain associated with the initial issue. So be a secondary cause of pain. So again, with the right parameters, you can release or reduce that spasm. So there's a lot of people are asking, can you describe how it works? Well, depending on the patient's needs, it can work many ways, and this is, I suppose, the beauty and the power of electroceuticals as a therapeutic. There's so many various mechanisms for an individual or for a patient. I mean, that's just talking about lower back pain.
Yeah.
If we got into things like a diabetes patient and the benefits there, the numerous factors become even more. And just going back to the lower back pain, if we then look at microcurrent, which can have the effect of reducing inflammation or helping the tissue to recover, or the body to heal itself at a cellular level. Again, there's well-established literature with regards to microcurrent and applicable parameters.
So and when we had our production meeting call, I think you did a great job of explaining to me, who didn't really know anything about this area, of when you talk about parameters. The parameters are those three different types of stimulation, and one of the things that you guys have done as part of your research in building the company is the ability to blend those different parameters and address specific areas or specific conditions based off of a unique blend of those three things. So maybe could you kind of just give us a bit of an overview about that, because I think that might be helpful to explain what you mean by parameter.
Sure. So we call those three different types of electrical stimulation modalities, if you like. So peripheral nerve, neuromuscular, and microcurrent. The parameters that we describe are those parameters within those modalities. So as an example, nerve stimulation, we're talking about frequency. So, there's a low frequency for the nerve itself. There's higher frequency specifically for pain pathway.
Okay.
Everything in between it, we could get, go very, very deep on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the neuromuscular parameters. So we talked then before about the ability to release muscle spasm.
Yep.
So we understand that there's certain frequencies and, types of phase, so electrical phase, and current levels, so level of current applied, that are useful for different musculature use. Relief of muscle spasm might be one, muscle pain might be another. In the case of re-educating muscle or the supporting muscles around a knee, which is often a cause of knee pain.
Yep.
There'll be specific parameters that will be useful for that. So what part of Nurokor's job is to research and develop those useful parameters into optimizing their therapeutic use.
Right.
So what are the best parameters?
Right. So when someone gets a product and they've got that product, they can sort of select within the product, well, my issue is this, and you have a pre-programmed almost
Correct.
program for them to follow with the right frequencies, with the right modalities, so it benefits their specific issue.
Exactly. We are electrical formulators. If you like.
Okay, that's a great little. I bet that should be on someone's business card somewhere, I hope.
Think about that. Yeah. And then when you get down to microcurrent, so microcurrent works. It's subsensory, so you cannot feel it. It mimics endogenous microcurrent, so the body's own level of current. So if you were to measure the current of your tissue or cells, microcurrent is operating at that same level. Okay. When in its simplest terms, when tissue is damaged, so you've got injury, you've got inflammation, you've got soft tissue damage, the cell current can drop or lower. If it drops low enough, it can die off. Okay. But applying, again, this is just one application, but if you can apply endogenous microcurrent, it's been shown to be able to normalize that cellular current, so to bring the tissue back into a healthy range. Wow. And obviously, healthy range means faster healing, a whole range of things. But we could get into the depths of it. Everything from wound closure to burns to. So I think now you bring that up is really interesting. Because like I said at the start of the show, there's a McKinsey article about all of the different uses or applications of bioelectronics and electroceuticals. You've mentioned a few. Obviously chronic pain, wound management, diabetes. I know that you're in sport. I also know that you have something with animals as well. Animal sports and animal sort of injury. How do you sort of structure with something that in theory could be used in so many different places? How are you managing that developmental process and stopping it sort of spiraling out of control? Not easy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right? I mean, opportunity is great, but then sometimes there's, you've got to manage it.
Yeah. So, there's a number of factors. One is, do we have the expertise within that particular therapeutic vertical market, as an example? So that's obviously the first consideration.
Yeah.
The other considerations are, is there an opportunity or solution where we can have impact? Diabetes as an example. Because we already have expertise or knowledge to be able to have an immense impact within that cohort already, then it becomes quite obvious for us. There's a solution, a healthcare solution here needed. We have a solution for it, and we have the expertise to impact it. So it gets a big tick. The case of the animal market. So animals are an interesting one, particularly things like equine and dogs, because their metabolism is so fast. Everything that happens at an accelerated rate. And microcurrent fits perfectly into this because it's subsensory, so it's well tolerated by the animal. And two, when we're having an impact, it's quite obvious. So things like injury, things like wounds, things like stress recovery, it's really quite obvious the impact we can have there. And again, it's an underserved market. And then when you start looking at things like canine, so canine arthritis is one of the fastest growing areas of health concern for the canine population. Whether that's lifestyle, whether that's environmental, whether that's things like diet. We don't have the solution for that. No, but what we do have, we have the ability to assist the animal in reduction of inflammation, the arthritis symptoms, and thus pain.
Wow. Okay. So let's jump back a little bit. So when you first came up with the idea for Nurokor and the range of products and what you were going to do, what was the reaction that you were getting from clinicians that you spoke to, or people who might want, like pharmacists, or what was the kind of reaction on the ground from I would say more from a clinical perspective to what you were talking about?
So they tend to fall into three primary groups. Okay. There are those that have knowledge of bioelectronics, electroceuticals, and so they understood it, and then what they really wanted to know is what made us different, how were we doing what different to what was already in existence. So that was a reasonably easy conversation, because there is just we still look around for it, but not that we've identified anyone doing things in the same way that we are. And that is actually what's attracted a lot of our expertise within these areas, because they've identified that we're doing things in alignment with how they feel they should be developed. The second crowd is those who know a little bit, and probably not in a positive way, as in isn't that just a TENS machine, which is quite a reductive comment. But or they sort of understand a little bit. And the first question is, where's your evidence? Where's the clinical evidence? So in the first instance, because we formulate off of existing clinical evidence, so we look at the studies, we look at what parameters work, we use that for formulating initially. So that was the first stage for us. The second is now that we have our own clinical trials and studies going with various groups, but these are really just to help us with validation. The real objective going forward is around the optimization and continuously finding out what's working best. So that has somewhat been overcome, and as they've had first-hand experience, whether it's pharmacies, whether it's clinicians, whether it's GPs or pain specialists, they've had a turnaround in most cases.
Well, so that's what was really interested me about when we spoke before, and then doing my own reading, is that there's this weirdly, this isn't like a new thing. There's bodies of research out there around the clinical efficacy of nerve stimulation, muscle stimulation, things like that. And what you've done is really build on that to develop your own formulations and your own sort of your own methodology and your own products. So it's sort of in a funny way, it sort of is it a bit like this? It's always been there, and now you've just sort of brought it together in the best way that you know how, sort of thing.
Yes, definitely that's where it started, and 100%. But the thing is, we are still, because it is such a new area. I mean, if we use Galvani bioelectronics as an example, I think which were noted a couple of times in the McKinsey article. There's a few others, but using them, they were funded by GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, and Google Verily Life Sciences, and their focus is on implantable vagus nerve stimulators or microstimulators.
Just to jump in, the vagus nerve is the primary nerve that connects the brain with the abdomen. Is that correct?
Correct. It's basically the nerve highway for the body.
Okay, right.
So they have different objectives, and again, it's in the implantable market, but they are. It's such early stages of development. I mean, we are still discovering ourselves, various benefits and therapeutic changes and applications within things that we are already operating with. So as far as I'm concerned, it's literally on the very early stage. The basics we've known for a long time. I mean, ancient Romans and Egyptians were using electric fish for treating pain and headaches, thousands of years ago.
Okay. So well, I'm glad your products moved slightly on since then. Exactly. Otherwise, I'm not sure you're going to get as much pickup, selling eels in a pharmacy as you might with a nice branded product.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. And so what in terms of the verticals that you've been working across, or have worked across, how have you gone about sort of gathering performance metrics or success metrics, or how do you, because obviously you're a mission-driven founder who founded this because of a personal issue that you had, but how do you go about sort of talking about the bigger picture to document or demonstrate the success of what you're doing?
So we've had, the success we've had in the consumer market with the MVP products has been, self-evident.
Okay.
And that has, we've actually created some spin-out products specifically for clinical use based off of that hardware.
Okay.
Particularly in the chronic pain market. Because it's a big one. So that launch, for instance, that new product will launch in the US in the coming months, and then across Europe and the UK. So I think the success there is self-evident. We've proven that we know what we're doing and the formulas work, and even on our consumer product, we provide a no questions asked 30-day money back guarantee.
Okay.
Which, if you find me another medical device that gives you that.
And is the feedback good? You're getting user satisfaction feedback and things like that?
Exactly. It's been above what we could have ever expected.
Oh, wow.
And so I think that success is quite self-evident. So it's given us not just the confidence, but I think the credibility, within these areas, because when you're talking about things like managing pain for a diabetic, and we are specifically formulating product for diabetes patients as an example, it's not a far reach from something that manages pain well. On average, it doesn't. Yeah. It's just that we're going to specialize it for that specific need. So that is sort of how it's presented itself. The success has been somewhat self-evident, and now it's about scale and about repeating that across those verticals, as well as scaling the actual size of distribution.
Okay. And what's the kind of current thinking around, or how are you differentiating yourselves from the other concepts in this space that are available? Like, for example, I know in sport there's a few, like Power Dot and things like that, but there might be a few other things. So I think we've touched on it a little bit, but how is Nurokor different to what otherwise might be available in different formats? So
it's a question of, if you were to select 10 personal trainers or strength and conditioning coaches,
okay,
that all may have their own formulas, if you like. for how to achieve an outcome. And it's not to say that any of them are wrong. And, those coaches may have various levels of success. So I can't say that anyone's doing it or we're doing it better, as in, what we're providing already. But one thing that one of our strengths is that development process around that optimizing for not just the application.
Sure.
Use strength as an example, but optimizing the application for the individual. That's the future for us. So what works for yourself, what works for Steve, works best for Steve, and what works for Rick works best for Rick. That's the future for us. So that's the biggest differentiator, I think, around what we're doing, as well as obviously the clinical side of it, which we don't see many of our competitors in the development space, more in the product space.
Right. So they're more focused on just trying to ship a product to consumers, whereas you're interested in genuinely trying to develop medical devices that, are medical devices under the definition, and actually drive forward the science.
Yeah, we're correct. We're interested in, no longer is the argument about whether electrical stimulation or electroceuticals work. That's old hat.
Yeah, we did that. We did that one.
Yeah, the future conversation is about how to make them better, how to make them more optimal, how to make them more efficient, and how to make the outcomes, whether it is in human performance or whether it is in therapeutics, how to make those outcomes better.
Okay, so let's talk quickly about the pain clinics, because I think that's a really interesting one, and that's obviously an evolution that you've taken beyond selling a product to an individual to use themselves. So what are you doing with pharmacies and these pain clinics?
So I think you talked about earlier about the role of community pharmacy, and I think that community pharmacies for the whole are undervalued. Particularly, I think this has become evident, through the global pandemic, and particularly in the UK, the role they've had to play in everything from still providing that healthcare service in some cases where the NHS could not, to literally what their namesake is, and that is that they are a community pharmacy. So the pharmacies have been running pain clinics in store, so that people during lockdown they could book a time to come in, but now that they're open, they're running them sort of at more volume, where the people can come in and get a treatment and try the product, try the therapy. And it's been hugely successful. And what has happened is the standards of operation, or the standard operation procedures, and the pathway, the patient pathway for these pain patients has fundamentally changed in practice. And this is a big one, because the success that the pharmacies are having has sort of taken on a life of its own, and whereby they're running them more consistently, and the patient stories that are coming out of them are very, very positive for us, but obviously very positive for the pharmacy and the patients.
And was anything because I'm sort of also interested in sort of before Nurokor, or also now, what someone has chronic pain, they went through your pathway, or any of the other issues that you deal with, but I think it's easy to relate to the chronic pain issue potentially as the pathway. Someone's been through multiple clinicians, physiotherapists, take painkillers, have an anti-inflammatory, etc. What other options are there in terms of other than Nurokor, or what was around when you first started? Like, what is the other sort of pathway just to continue on doing the same thing? Or what's the?
Yeah, well, so some of our clinicians, and even some of our team who are clinicians or GPs talk about this pain ladder.
Right.
And often what ends up happening is once the patients are on it, it tends to only go up.
Right.
And not down.
It goes one way.
Correct.
One way traffic.
Yeah, and it's about breaking that cycle. And through my own experience, and still to this day, with practice in general, there's lots of things that are tried, and there's physical therapy, there's other interventions, and some of them are they work and they're effective. But that's not the only criteria needed. What's needed is easy access, easy to use. So the patient needs to be able, empowering, the patient needs to be able to take control of their own treatment and outcome.
And it needs to be timely, I assume.
So you can have it in your pocket or your bag, just like you would, a pharmaceutical intervention, as and when you need it, or if you do need it, not to have to book in per se to get a treatment.
Well, yeah, you would, like, it's the equivalent, I guess, would be you don't book a doctor's appointment to go and take a paracetamol.
No,
take paracetamol.
Yes, so meeting, I suppose, all of that criteria is where the positives have come from,
right?
And some of the, well, not some, but the pharmacies that have come on board and continue to come on board have identified this quite quickly, and thus have built off of it.
And was this concept of a pain clinic happening in some way, shape, or form prior to you doing anything in this space, or is this a new sort of concept?
So I think, I wouldn't say that it was a new concept. I mean, pharmacies would run clinics or appointments for various things, whether it was nutrition, whether it was weight loss, whether it was diabetes, they would run these consultations previously. But what has happened is that, I suppose, what the sheer level of success that they're having with the product, with the therapy,
right,
is what it's been built off. Because you can run any type of clinic you like, and they run many different types of clinics, but it's only going to endure if it's working successfely.
It's effective.
It has to be successful for the patient, for one.
But
it also has to be successful for the pharmacy from an economic and time perspective. Is it improving their own credibility and value to the patient?
Great. Well, I think I think that's a great innovation. I can imagine that chronic pain. I mean, look, I've had back issues over the last 6 months. I wouldn't say it's anywhere close to chronic pain, but it's as you say, it's isolating, it's debilitating. It affects your mental health because you feel like you're only capable of a percentage of what you are otherwise capable of. So anything that helps with that, I think, is anything that increases access there, I think, is a fantastic idea. So what's we've got a few minutes left on the show. So what's next for Nurokor? I know you've got very, very big plans, and your technology can be applied in different areas. But over the next 12 months, what are the one or two top things for the business?
So the biggest area for us, I mean, hardware is a given. I mean, our hardware is okay. It's not groundbreaking. It was our MVP. Right. But going forward, our hardware becomes modular. What that means is that it becomes more personalized, wearable by way of application. Again, fitting into not just digital health, but fitting into lifestyle, what people expect. If you'd said to someone 10 years ago or 15 years ago, be measuring your heart rate on health apps through your watch, they would have said
continuously.
Yes.
In the background.
We're moving into the biosensor phase. At the moment, things like blood glucose monitoring is taking off, and all of the advantages of being able to build in real-time sensoring. So this is definitely an area that we are working on at the moment. Adding to that, the hyper-personalization. Again, this is where pharmaceuticals are also headed. No longer is systemic and blanket dosing. That's not enough anymore. It has to be dosage specific to the individual patient's needs, and it's a similar pathway for us, and that is around the precision medicine, if you like, of the application of electroceuticals. So that's the future around your device learning what's best for you and optimizing that for you, and that is going forward the differentiator for Nurokor versus other players is that data belongs to Nurokor. And it's not something that someone can copy or emulate unless they've got their own. They can have their own data, just like a lot of the DNA companies do. But ultimately, our data is our data, and the individual's data for their use is theirs.
Interesting. And what do you think in terms of the entire field of bioelectronics and electroceuticals? What do you think is the top one or two huge developments that in the field that are likely to happen in the next 12 to 24 months?
So if the implantables make a product,
if they actually manage to get a product together, is basically what you're trying to say in a nice way.
I hope I don't get attacked for this, but
no, I just, that was me. That's not Rick.
that there's no doubt they have the potential there to have impact. But by the same token, I think that there's a huge potential for impact in the wearable, non-invasive space. Whereby it just fits into your lifestyle. You wear it like you would a piece of clothing.
Yeah.
And it's providing therapy that's beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
So pain is one, but I think that the micronization and the wearability and electroceuticals fitting into lifestyle is, that they will be hard to compete. They'll be hard to have competition within that type of application.
Okay. And just before we go, final question. If anyone listening is suffering from chronic pain, what would you recommend that they do, having been through the process yourself?
Well, if they're repeating the same thing they've repeated for years, I would say that they need to try something new. If there's a local pharmacy that's providing the pain clinic, it's a perfect place to start. Or if they wanted to jump onto our website and wanted to try a device for 30 days, absolutely risk-free, then of course we